Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today, I spoke to Arthur Breitman, who is the co-founder of the Tezos blockchain and a member of the Tezos Foundation Council. If you've been around crypto for a while, you know that Tezos has been there since 2017 when it raised $232 million in its initial coin offering. I talked to Arthur about that and about any concerns he has about going the ICO route now that we've seen the SEC get more involved with enforcement actions. We talked about his time as a quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. We went back into his childhood and sort of delved into his early love of thinking about democracy and the way that voting confers rights and obligations on folks. It's something that he brought to Tezos, which has a very interesting embedded voting mechanism so that the blockchain can be updated in real time as things come up that its users want to change or implement. So we talked about all of that stuff and about where it's headed now, and it's big in the NFT space and with art and music. And we talked a little bit about his time at Google X, where he helped design the systems for self-driving cars to make left turns. So I thought that was an interesting part of the conversation. So let's get to it. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Hi, Arthur. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I have been looking forward to speaking with you because, to be honest, I don't know a lot about Tezos, and you are the co-founder of the Tezos blockchain. And I've been doing my research and digging into it, and it's a fascinating story. And I'm also intrigued with your background on Wall Street when you were at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, and just really looking forward to digging into all that stuff and to hear your views just on the wider space at the moment. Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
I thought we'd just jump into it and go back to when you were writing the white papers that laid out the idea for Tezos. And I was hoping you could just tell me, to start with, what was the idea and what was the problem that you were trying to solve by creating Tezos?
It's a common misconception, but the Tezos white paper was written by a pseudonymous contributor named L.M. Goodman. But when I was starting to work on Tezos, the things that interested me most was the notion of innovation. So we had Bitcoin that had come out, which was a massive innovation, and Bitcoin being
and we're talking like 2014 here, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So I got interested in Bitcoin very early on. I think like as early as 2010. But the thing that fascinated me was not only that Bitcoin was possible, but all of the ideas that flourished around it. So Bitcoin was there, Bitcoin was working, Bitcoin was also flawed in several ways. People were thinking through it. So they were thinking through how can Bitcoin be more private, not have every transaction exposed to everyone. How can Bitcoin be more scalable? Are there extension of transactions? Can we do other things? Can we use smart contracts on these blockchains? Mm-hmm. Do we need mining? Are there ways to reach consensus which are safer and less costly than proof of work? So I started reading all the work around this, and I found it fascinating. But there was a meta problem that I was interested in, which is these systems are decentralized. Are we going to be condemned to this idea that any new innovation has to be launched as a separate coin? And that doesn't make sense, because fundamentally, the economics is that everything should consolidate towards one currency, but you don't want to have to replace your currency every single time you have some important innovation. Mm-hmm. So how do you reconcile the need for stability and the need for innovation? There was also, I would say, just a general public good provision problem in Bitcoin. There's some public good provision that happens through mining. Miners get a reward. So the way you pay for the security of the network is via inflation. Bitcoin is this inflation built in every block. But there's a lot of other public good that you could be facing, such as, for example, you might need to convince people to do things with your network. You might need to promote it in different ways. And private actors might have some personal incentive to do that, but maybe not enough of an incentive. Mm-hmm. And that led me on the idea of governance. Essentially, you want to have a governance layer so that the people using the system can coordinate and do things and do more than just use it. And they can coordinate on deciding what innovations are worthwhile and what innovations are not worthwhile, and they can coordinate on funding public goods. This was
Can I jump in and ask, just for folks who might not be familiar with the term public goods, what do you mean by that?
The notion of a public good is it's a good that everyone benefits from, that people cannot easily be excluded from, and it's costly. So the typical example, for example, is a public park. If you have a public park, maybe property value goes up. Everyone benefits from having a public park because they enjoy going to the park. However, it's difficult to exclude people from the public park because you would have to basically have a gate, and you would have to charge people, or you would have to check that they have a ticket to enter the park. So a private park may be more difficult to run than just a public park that's easily accessible. Mm-hmm. The problem with something like a public park is, how do you pay for it? In principle, you could go to everyone and say, please pay for the public park benefits, but then you get a free rider problem where some people will say, you know what, thank you very much, I'll benefit from the advantage of the public park, but I don't want to pay for it. And then the question is, what do you do? The traditional answer to that is some form of governance. So sometimes the governance can be voluntary. So you might have people who form homeowner association, and they use that as a way to pay for public good. You could have people who want to do things together. They form a corporation, and they also basically use that as a form of governance. You use corporate law. Sometimes it takes forms which can be coercive. So when people think of public goods, most of the time they're thinking of government and taxes.
In a blockchain context, that would be aligning incentives, like in a positive way, so that the people in charge of the network are incentivized not to do nasty things or bad things in the network. Is that kind of the point?
Yeah, it's not just about aligning incentives. I guess another way to frame the question is like, why do you need governance for anything? And in general, there's a lot of things that you can solve without governance when you have property rights. If you have very clear property rights and you say, this is my house and this is your house, and what is the governance procedure? Like, how should we decide on what can be done with each houses? And the simple answer is, I do whatever I want with my house, and you do whatever you want with your house. And governance is necessary once you start having property which is shared. If instead of living in houses, we're living in an apartment building, and that apartment has an elevator, then the elevator is shared between the two tenants in this building, and they need a way to pay for the elevator per person. So then they need to have a governance system that says who decides when to repair the elevator, who decides how much to pay, and so on and so forth. So you need governance.
They would have monthly dues and whatnot to have.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So you're looking at Bitcoin. Bitcoin does not have that governance structure on it. That's one of its flaws.
It has some. It has some,
but it's and everybody very hard to make changes in that network, right?
No. It has some around, but governance doesn't have to be about making changes. Bitcoin has governance around the block reward, for example. So Bitcoin has a way of the security of the Bitcoin network is a public good, and it's paid by inflation. So basically, as a Bitcoin holder, you are taxed to pay miners to maintain the security of the network. It's a voluntary tax because you decided to buy and hold Bitcoin in the first place, but it's still very similar to, without the coercive aspect, it's still, from an economic perspective, very similar to a tax funding a public good. And there's a perception, I would say, because a lot of the early adopters of Bitcoin, like myself, are very strong libertarians. There's a tendency among libertarians to try to pretend that public good problems are not real. There's no such thing as a public good problem. But it's silly. Just, you can oppose coercion and taxation in many respects and still understand that they are real public good problems, and like governance is a good way to.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about governance, that's, I think, where we went on that tangent. But so take me back to your thoughts there and how that led to Tezos.
Tezos was a bit of this meta idea of saying a lot of altcoins were launching with innovations, and most of these innovations were not very good. Some of them were interesting, like some people were trying to have smart contracts, some people were trying to have privacy, faster block times. There were some early experiments in proof of stake. But fundamentally, I realized what you need is you don't need any of this thing. What you really need is governance, so that these things can be built over time, so that this thing can be funded, and so that this thing can be approved by a governance procedure. Tezos really starts out of this idea of how do you have a solid governance layer that allows a chain to upgrade itself, to basically get better over time without centralization.
Okay. How did you go about that? One thing I wanted to get into was as Tezos holders, as people who hold Tez, the coin that's native to your blockchain, they vote on proposals. And if a proposal passes, the Tezos blockchain automatically makes the update to the software. And I wanted to just simply ask you, how does that happen? What's the mechanism?
Very concretely, when people vote on a proposal in Tezos, they vote on a hash. And that happens over about a 3-month period currently. So there's 3 votes. The first vote is an approval voting mechanism to select one proposal among potentially competing proposals. And approval voting is the same as upvoting. Essentially, you have a bunch of proposals, and every baker, which are the validator of the network, the people who create the blocks in the network, can select whichever proposals they like, and they can select more than one. And you pick the proposal which has the most upvotes. It sounds like a very simple system, but if you are a bit of a election system nerd, people generally rate this as one of the best voting systems. It's one of the most robust. There are theorems that say, the Condorcet theorem will tell you that basically there's no perfect voting system, but one of the closest one is approval voting. So after that period, the proposal which was selected is then selected to a vote, which is should we have this or not have this? So there's a yes or no vote that takes place. Then there's a period where there's no vote, just for people to reflect on just what happened. And then there's another confirmation vote. So it's a long procedure, and it's conservative by default, because you don't really need to necessarily rush these changes. You want to make sure that you're not harming the network. But not harming the network is more important than moving very fast. Also, once proposal every 3 months does let you move quite fast. And in fact, right now, the Tezos bakers are voting on a proposal called Oxford. Proposals have been historically named after cities in the order of the alphabet. So it started with Athens and then Babylon, and now it's at Oxford, which means it's the...
I think was the one before that, right?
Exactly right. So it means it's the 14th, 15th, no, before that was Nairobi. Mumbai, Nairobi, Oxford.
Oh, yeah.
So it's the 15th proposal to the network.
And then, so there's a period of reflection. There's a second vote. If that passes, does the hash somehow set into motion that action that was approved by the community?
So once the chain is basically once the logic on the chain has decided on a hash, every single client, every single Tezos node that's running is going to fetch the source code of the upgrade over the network, is going to check that the source code matches the hash, of course, is then going to compile it, and it's going to hot swap the protocol. So it's going to replace itself on the fly. And then once that's happened, it has a new protocol. So it's then, in some sense, the meta protocol doesn't change. It's just it just replaces its engine on the fly.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So as opposed to Ethereum, where people choose to either download the latest version with updates in it, on Tezos, it's done automatically, and it's just what happens.
The automated part is really interesting, but it's not the only difference. And the important difference is there's this notion sometimes that forking is a form of governance, and it used to be a form of governance for open source projects. So you had open source project, not in the crypto space, and then people had a disagreement over where to take the project, what feature to build, and then maybe they make a copy of the code. It's open source. They have a license to do that, and they build their own version in a corner, and you build your own version in your corner, and now you have 2 versions, and that's fine so long as there's not too much network effect. But you don't want 2 versions of a coin running at the same time, because fundamentally you're going to halve the value. You're going to lose the network effects. And in general, it's when those forks have happened and those splits have happened, one side will capture 98% of the value and the other side almost nothing. And there's this idea that if people have a choice whether or not to fork, in some sense they're exercising their choice in forking, and the outcome of the fork is a governance procedure. And it is true that it is a governance procedure, but the choice is illusory, because if you run the branch that you prefer and ignore the other one, you will lose money. It's very important essentially for you to decide which branch is going to keep its value and which branch is not going to keep its value. If you have contracts, if you're supposed to receive payments, which coin do you accept? That's quite important. And your incentive is to basically agree with everyone else. It's a game that's been decried by Thomas Schelling, and sometimes called a Schelling point, where everyone benefits from agreeing on the same thing that everyone else is going to agree. And so it's the equivalent of, instead of having elections and voting for someone, it would be like asking everyone, who would you bet is going to win? And who do you bet is going to win is a very different question than who would you prefer to win. So you're not really expressing a preference in a fork. You're just merely trying to follow the clout. And the clout can be very fickle, and the clout can be determined by very small factors. So I think those fork-based governance, they seem to give a free choice, but in practice, they're extremely centralizing.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I hadn't thought about it that way. Before you got into all this deep dive exploration of governance and the community building, where do you think that came from in your life beforehand? What were you into as a kid? And do you think this is a continuation, something that's fascinated you for your entire life?
Oh, yeah, I would say. I mean, I was a nerdy kid. I was into a lot of topics. Probably one of my biggest topics being like a child was fundamental physics and mathematics were very big for me.
Where did you go?
I grew up near Paris.
Okay.
In a small town in Montrouge, which is just on the south border of Paris. And I grew up in a family of not of scientists. My father was a writer and a playwright and an actor. And my mother worked for the National Printery. It was all in the letters. And I grew up obsessed with math and science. I got into programming, I think, around the age of 9, but it wasn't I was doing it a bit, but it wasn't my main focus. My main focus was really math and physics. I also had a strong interest in finance. I remember, I think around the age of 9 or so, we visited New York, and my obsession was visiting the New York Stock Exchange. And
Yeah.
I had an interest in stocks and
There were still people
trading
down there on the floor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're pretty much gone now. Do you think you gravitated towards science and physics and finance as a way to not do what your parents were doing?
No, I don't. There was no rejection. In fact, I was doing this and then still thinking about the arts and such. It was just like a natural calling for me.
Yeah.
I was just like, I had a strong affinity for it. And that was really my focus for a while. I started switching more towards really math in high school. And then in high school, it became math and like specifically math and computer science. I would say starting in around the age of 15, that becomes really my thing.
Mm-hmm. And were you in it just for the intellectual stimulation? Did you have a job path in mind, or how were you thinking about that?
I didn't strongly have a job path in mind. I think the first time I really started thinking about like specifically a job and focusing on something was probably towards middle of high school, because I had several centers of interest. I had considered research and a few things, but I had a strong interest in finance, strong interest in computer science, and I realized that automated trading was a thing, and so I decided to go into quant finance. I think probably around like 17 or 18, but I was still hesitant. Like the whole tech aspect was. So I went to.
So what year are we talking there roughly?
I went to university. So France has a weird system. So the thing I was to is technically called an école, another university, and it's like halfway between a master's and a bachelor, and they require you to do a year after that. And so I had to become a master, and I decided to do a master in the US. And at the time, like until the very last minute, and this is like 2005, I wasn't sure. It was either going to go to New York to do quant finance or to Stanford to do computer science. And so even at that point, I was still a bit undecided.
Okay. But I think you chose New York, if I remember.
I did choose New York.
Yeah.
For bad reasons, by the way. I don't regret my choice.
Get into
but like,
that. What were the bad reasons?
The campus of the school I went to in France is like in a very rainy place, and it's like old buildings from the 70s, and I was depressed like being on a campus, and I was like, I want to live in the city. I do not want to be on a campus. And I think that ended up being a big factor.
Yeah. NYU is right down there in the West Village, isn't it?
Exactly.
I don't think Stanford would have been so bad either with all the sunshine.
No, that's the thing. I visited this later in life. I visited the Stanford campus, and I always say, "Oh, you know what? This might have been fine."
Yeah.
And specifically also like NYU over Columbia, because Columbia was up time. I was like, no. It was like, I highly optimized for just like density.
Yeah. You can't take the subway up there every day. New York had a fascination for you when you were a kid and you went to see the New York Stock Exchange. What was it like coming back as a young adult and on a career path? And that would have been, I was in New York at that time, right before the financial crisis. It was insane. There was money. It seemed like there was just money flowing in the streets in New York City, and everybody was doing fabulously well. Was that kind of your experience?
Not really. Maybe I'm not like the most perceptive person either. So maybe I wasn't paying attention. But I was excited. I was excited to start working in finance. I did my master's first. I was working full time for my master's. But the first job I did out of my master's was for a startup hedge fund, which like started trading in 2007. And then quickly the financial crisis hit. And so of course that put some roadblocks into the hedge fund. Yeah.
How did you get from there to, was Goldman your first job as a quant analyst?
No, I did this. I worked for this startup hedge fund first. I would say like from 2007 to 2009. In 2009, I got interested into high frequency trading. Goldman was in the news around high frequency trading. So I interviewed at a bunch of places, and I really liked the team that I interviewed with at Goldman. So I ended up like moving to Goldman Sachs in 2009 in their high frequency trading team.
Okay.
The joke I like to do, it's not a joke, it's very real. It's not meaningful, but it's still funny. If you've ever heard of this programmer who left Goldman Sachs and there was a lawsuit because there was a claim that he took some files, Sergei Alenikov. And so he left basically just like very shortly before I joined, and I inherited his chair, like his computer chair. Yes, I was doing a different job, but I was literally sitting in his chair.
Were you trading equities?
I was first hired to work on potentially doing treasuries. So they were like, there was eSpeed was trading, and there was another one that was trading treasuries.
TradeWeb? Was TradeWeb doing it?
It was not TradeWeb, it was eSpeed, another one. But yeah, so it was like accuracy trading.
Maybe?
Yes, BrokerTech. That's correct.
Yeah.
BrokerTech and eSpeed were doing like treasuries. Then, but that was part of the equity group. That moved to the fixed income group. And then we tried to do market making in commodities. So I worked on natural gas, corn, and oil. That was fun. But the thing where I had the best fit and the most fun, I would say, is when I started working on foreign ETF, market making of ETF traded in the US with foreign underliers.
Okay.
An ETF of Chinese stocks, an ETF of Indian stocks, this type of things.
Okay. And yeah, interesting. So we're getting up into, I think you would have been aware of crypto at that point, right? We're getting up to 2010-ish.
Yeah, so I got aware quickly. So one of the things I was doing at the time is I was organizing the anarcho-capitalist meetup in New York. And it was
and
purely
that's where you met your
club.
wife. I have that on the list here.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me, first of all, what is what is an anarcho-capitalist?
So anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy that suggests that all functions essentially of government could be better served by private markets, including things like defense and police and courts. And so it's been popularized by authors like Murray Rothbard and David Friedman, for example. So it is very libertarian, obviously, in nature. And it was one of my centers of interest. And I was new to New York, and it was a good way to meet people and make friends to start a meetup group. So I did that and met a lot of interesting people through this. And one of them, Barry Metzger, was running the cryptography mailing list, which is where Bitcoin was originally announced. And the big topic quickly around these meetups, because again, everyone who was in these very libertarian circles got interested into this money without government. Again, it is an example of a function that people like traditionally would ascribe to governments, which can be actually served by private markets.
I'm curious if you think growing up in France, which obviously is a much more socialized country than the United States, being in that environment, do you think that did that turn you off and turn you towards that sort of more libertarian thought?
Yeah, definitely.
What was it about the French system? Like, is there anything in particular that you remember? Was it like the bureaucracy or anything, or something that just didn't sit well with you?
There was a few things. Growing up, I wasn't very political. I didn't think much about politics. And the one thing I had an intuition of is I thought there was something weird about the way that people talked about democracy. And specifically, what I didn't like is when people looked at democracy not as a tool of governance, but as something that's intrinsically moral. So essentially, there's two ways you can look at democracy. And you can say, well, democracy yields good outcomes in some sense. People will not vote for horrible people, or they will vote horrible people out. You get a bloodless revolution. You have all these benefits so that democratic regime will treat people better in general. And that's an argument I'm very sympathetic with. I don't think it's ironclad, but I'm very sympathetic to it. So there's another argument, which is, there's no good and bad governance. It's just intrinsically good that people have a voice in the political process. It's on its own. As an end, it's important for people to voice something, not because it yields good outcome. And that, just from an early age, just made very little sense to me. And so that was my one political thought. And then when I started learning more macroeconomics, I started looking at a lot of policies. And now I had basically a compass. I had a mental framework through which I could think about politics. Because otherwise I would listen to politicians and I would say, well, he makes a lot of sense. And this other guy makes a lot of sense. And they both right. I don't know. And having the mental compass to actually say, wait a second, this is a complete nonsense. That I would say did a big transformation for me. And obviously, my parents in France and in the arts were pretty left wing. I grew up in a left wing family, but it was not rebellion because it came really late in life. It was more realization that all of the discourse around policy in France didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. I wonder if that idea of democracy as being just in and of itself a moral practice dates back to like when I was a kid, Soviet Union was still there, the USSR, and there was obviously a very big conflict between the two political systems there, like Western democracy versus communism. Okay. Okay, I think that's really interesting. But how do we, now I wanted to just touch real quickly on, you also worked at Google X, which, can you tell people, I don't know if a lot of people know this part of Google X or Google that's called Google X. Can you just tell people what that is, first of all?
Yeah, and we call it Google X because that was the first name of it. But technically, when I was there, the official name was called X, the Moonshot Factory. But I wanted to call it that.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, so Google X started out as a branch of Google, or Alphabet now, to run crazy bets, crazy experiments, like really moonshots, like technologies which were very ambitious and could be revolutionary if successful, but had maybe not necessarily a very high chance of success. And some of the projects that came out of Google X were Google Brain, the early deep learning effort in AI from Google. Yeah. It came out of Google X. So that became a branch of Google, and lately they merged with DeepMind, which was a Google acquisition to become Google DeepMind. And another one, and one of the oldest, was Waymo, which was called Chauffeur originally, which was Google's self-driving car effort. And so this is what I joined. So I joined Google X, or X the Moonshot Factory, to work on the self-driving car program. And while I was there, it got spun out as a proper company called Waymo.
Okay.
But it was still within the Google X office and owned by Alphabet.
That sounds like such a fun job because you're basically being asked to just go out there and try crazy shit. What?
If you say it like this, yes, but in practice, the stuff I was asked to do it's fun, but I was working on left turns because
really?
When you drive on the right, a left turn is much harder than a right turn if you don't have a protected light, because you have to negotiate through the intersection as the car is passing you, and so left turn. And but the mission was super ambitious and super interesting, and still is. The team was fantastic. The office setting was amazing.
Yeah, I bet.
And I had the lifestyle of a billionaire.
Really?
Yeah. There was a guy in the office who was always around the office and always at the cafeteria. And I have a thing like where even like down to the medical level, I have a hard time recognizing people. But I saw that this guy, this employee, I was like, this is funny because he looks like Sergey Brin. And I thought this guy looked like Sergey Brin for about 4 months until I realized that, oh no, it is Sergey Brin.
No, it's actually him. Yeah.
And when you think about it,
co-founder of Google.
Yeah. And so 90% of his time, he was in the same office as me, talking to the same people as me, wearing the same type of clothes and eating the same, pretty much the same food. Aside from the 5% of the time where he takes his private 47 and flies to some private island, 95%, and he had the same phone as me, 95% of his life is very similar to mine. So I joke that I had the lifestyle of a multi-billionaire at the time.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. The jokes reminded me of when you said you worked on left turns. There's a joke that if you're feeling bad about your job or you're insignificant, just remember that it's somebody's job to put turn signals into BMWs. So,
yes.
So now help me bridge the from there. This is post Wall Street, right? That you're at Google X?
Yeah, okay. So basically my Wall Street experience was startup hedge fund, Goldman Sachs. I did then I tried a prop shop where I tried to run a strategy on my own as part of a mini hedge fund, and then Morgan Stanley.
Okay.
And then Google X.
Okay. So then let's start getting back to Tezos. So I just wanted to touch on one thing you said early. The white papers, they were done under the L.M. Goodman, which during my research, I read that was a reference to Leah Goodman, who was the Business Week reporter that tried to unveil Satoshi Nakamoto. And that really made me laugh because I know Leah. We used to be competitors. She was at Dow Jones and I was at Bloomberg News, and we were both writing about the New York Mercantile Exchange, where crude oil and gas is traded, the futures market. That was you, right? You're LM Goodman, and you did that because you were still, I think, working on Wall Street and didn't want to get in trouble.
No, so first of all, when I started working on Tezos, I told a bunch of people I was working on Tezos. Certainly, there was no such, I don't want to get into trouble. Yes, people have claimed that I am a good man. I have not commented on the topic. But yeah, it's pretty funny because look, Liam Goodman went by the idea that because the name on the Bitcoin paper was Satoshi Nakamoto, then maybe that person is really named Satoshi Nakamoto. So for all I know, Liam Goodman wrote the Tezos white paper. Because she has the same name. What are the odds?
That's good. It's a pretty meta view. I like that. Okay. And we're back to, so first of all, you thought that governance was much more important in a blockchain environment than anything out there at that time, it sounds like. And that makes sense, knowing your background and about thinking about systems and democracy and what types of democracy or how the effects of democracy can be good, and that it's not necessarily just inherently a moral thing. What were there other, because out of the box, Tezos, it was proof of stake. It was very fast. You had those governance systems in place. So were those other concerns on your mind as well? And that you thought that this global network of computers and validators could be used for much more than what was being done at the time?
Yeah, I think one of my initial theses is that, and I've been also a critic of, let me track back a little bit. There was a meme in 2014 around Bitcoin, which was like, money is just the first app. And it was like, wait a second, money is the most important app. And I still believe that. So I would say that money and store of value have been underhyped, and other use cases have been overhyped overall, which doesn't mean that they don't exist. But when I tried to do essentially a synthesis of what is this technology, what does it do, if it does anything beyond money, I think I coined this idea. I'm not sure, but like this is very early on, I described it as social coordination technology, and I think that's the best way to summarize what it does is like social coordination. So you can coordinate around money, you can coordinate around the enforcement of contracts, and a few things like this. That's how I would put it.
Okay. But then it seems like speed and reliability and scalability were also things that you were working on very early.
No, I got that wrong. So early, actually, this wasn't super fast. It wasn't slow, but it wasn't particularly fast when it came out. And I didn't think speed and scalability mattered at all, actually.
Okay.
I didn't focus on that because my thinking at the time was fundamentally that the most important use case was going to be money and the store of value, and that you would have a network of permissionless centralized actors happen around it. So even early on with Bitcoin, people were saying like Bitcoin doesn't scale. And my answer to this was like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you have a permissionless settlement layer. And if you have this permissionless settlement layer, you will have a bunch of Bitcoin banks who will like arise and allow people to trade. And because they can't be cut off from the Bitcoin network, like you can be cut off from the dollar network, you can be cut off from the banking network. Because people can't be cut off from the Bitcoin network, maybe they will be in Kazakhstan, maybe. So there'll be some sort of jurisdictional arbitrage, which means that there will exist this thriving financial network of centralized but permissionless actors on top of Bitcoin. So that's how I imagine scaling would take place. And I think that was wrong. We've seen that it works a lot better when things are done with smart contracts. Like a typical example is a lot of those cryptocurrency lenders went bust in the crisis in 22, but DeFi protocols actually we did well through the crisis, and that requires on-chain scaling. And so I got more interested in scaling, I would say, circa 2019. I started thinking more of scaling and the layer 2 solution, but there was actually had a scaling my scaling idea in 2017. And one of my most popular blog post was 2017. I was commenting on the sharding in Ethereum, and I proposed essentially using zero-on-the-edge proofs as a scaling technique, which is now what people are doing with ZK rollups.
Yep.
Yeah, but for a while I didn't really have a scaling solution that I liked, and then I really stumbled onto something that I think made sense and worked. I would say late 2020, and so since then, I would say since 2021, the focus of most of the core teams working on Tezos has been scaling. But I was late to thinking about scaling as being critical.
Okay. I wanted to talk about security as well. I think there's a good security record going for it. And I wondered, how do you compare it to other layer one blockchains? And then most of the time, it seems to me that issues arise in decentralized apps that are on top of those blockchains. So I just was curious how you think about that and the interplay between the two.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did catch early on was that people would write apps with smart contracts, that there would be bugs in those smart contracts, and it would cost and those bugs would cost a lot of money. So I predicted that fairly well in 2014. And I say, ergo, people are going to invest quite a bit into smart contract security. And I got everything right except the last part.
Yeah, that last part.
If you had told me, you know what, there's going to be a thriving ecosystem of smart contracts, no one is going to care about security. People are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, which are going to be stolen by nation state. And still people are not going to care. It's that last part that still floors me. It's just, I don't understand why people don't invest millions to prevent hundreds of millions being lost. This is still very bizarre to me, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I don't understand why security is not absolutely the first thing that people think about and invest in.
Yeah.
When they're.
I have some hypotheses. Essentially, if most apps are basically driven by speculation, if we're nice gambling, if most apps are just pretty much people saying gambling, then people say, it's very risky anyway. I'm probably going to lose my money anyway. So whether they lose their money because it was a rug pull or because the thing didn't make sense in the first place or because it was hacked, maybe to them it's the same category of risk. Yeah. And it's reducing the smart contract risk when you're taking massive financial risk in the first place isn't very meaningful. So that I would imagine that's an explanation. And more serious projects where you actually are trying to engage in something that's not risky in the first place, then you don't want the added risk of the smart contracts. That might make some sense.
How you were talking about zero knowledge proofs and rollups and the layer twos, so to speak, that have evolved. What's your take on that? How do you think that's working? And do you think that's the future, or are you guys thinking about doing that? Do you need to do that at Tezos, I guess is the question.
So I think that rollup as a scaling solution are absolutely the future. In fact, rollups are so good that even if you don't want to run multiple rollups, you're better off having all of your chain activity in a single rollup than having it on a layer one for a variety of reasons. And the best way to summarize it is that on a layer one, every validator needs to do everything, and you need to have an honest majority of validators. Whereas in a rollup, you only need one honest operator. And if you only need one honest operator, you can demand a lot more. You can demand that they have a much better hardware. You can hope that they're going. You can hope that they're going to be anonymous. You can hope that they're going to be in a friendly jurisdiction. So you have way more choice if all you need is one person. Whereas if you want an L1 and you're decentralized and you need to have these people really all over the world, then essentially you can do a lot less. From I would say censorship resistance perspective, from a security perspective, from a throughput perspective, you're way better using rollups, whether or not they are ZK rollups or optimistic rollup. And that's the key thing, is moving from a honest majority assumption to a single honest party assumption.
Yeah, does that tilt you in favor of the zero knowledge proof rollups rather than optimistic?
In optimistic, both need an honest actor. So if you don't have an honest actor at all with ZK rollup, then you're going to have a liveness failure, which means your rollup won't advance. And if you don't have an honest actor with optimistic rollup, then you could have a safety failure. From that standpoint, ZK rollup would be superior. However, DK rollup currently, they have a very high cost. It's very computer intensive to produce those proofs, so much that the cost of transaction can actually get high, not because of network congestion, just because of the cost of compute that's involved in making those proofs. So I would say until the proving cost comes down quite a bit for ZK rollup, I'm more interested in optimistic rollups.
Okay, interesting. I wanted to touch on the ICO a little bit because you guys were right in there in 2017. You raised $232 million, which was, I think, a record at the time, only to be broken by Filecoin, if I'm correct. Still on that. You held it in Zug, I believe, in Switzerland. What was that experience like? And do you still have worries about anyone coming after you from the United States in terms of an unsecured or unregistered securities offering? Is that in the past, or how do you think about that?
The funny thing is, first of all, this fundraiser was conducted by the Tezos Foundation. I was not a part of the Tezos Foundation. I was basically like running a software company. I was selling my IP to the Tezos Foundation. I was not a part of it. And some people would say, oh, but no, like the events that took place after were basically the Tezos Foundation that was led by a bit of a psychopath tried to bankrupt me, shows that I very much was not a part of the Tezos Foundation. So they got sued, but the problem is like when you are I think one of the person who sued them he was a guy running a cult. He's doing 10 years in jail now for raping a child in the guy's name is Joe Salerno. So the Salerno family from Australia decided to sue the Tezos Foundation in Switzerland based on a contribution in Bitcoin that they sent to them that was included in the Bitcoin network by a Russian miner. And of course, the proper venue for this is California. And I got named personally in the lawsuit, so that was not pleasant. And yeah, that's 2 years of my life I'm not getting back. But look, at the end of the day, when I did a deal with the Tezos Foundation, I retained a lot of legal advice. We got the best legal advice we could get at the time, and I don't think we could have done a better preparation. Am I worried about lawsuit? For a long time in my life, I imagined that being sued was this absolutely horrible thing, and then I was sued, and it was just as expected, absolutely horrible. But I would say, once you've lived through it once, at least you get a very thick skin. I certainly have no interest in being sued again, but I'm very comfortable in my legal position.
Yeah, understood. Do you look back at that time and wish you had done things differently, or what do you think about when you think about that time? Is there was some tumult there when you guys were getting off the ground, and like you mentioned, some infighting, and things didn't always go as smoothly as I'm sure you would have liked. What's your takeaway from that? Almost 6 years later?
No, I would say infighting was a myth because it wasn't infighting. It was basically the foundation just basically said, you know what, we're not going to honor our contract. We're not going to pay developers. We're not going to launch a network. We're not going to pay you the money you're supposed to pay you. Yeah. So that's not infighting.
Those are big
just
things.
That's just a Tezos Foundation trying to defraud me and my company. So that's not really infighting. That's just being hit in the face. But there's a ton of things we could have done differently, and it's not a very constructive game to just basically go back and what is the smallest thing I could change to make things better. Clearly, the smallest thing I can change is not work with this psychopath, or that's probably like the smallest change with the biggest effect. But I also honestly, I prefer the game of if I had to design Tezos from scratch, what make different. And I think one of the biggest mistake was not being faster to market. So it was very important for me that Tezos launch as proof of stake first, not with proof of work. And what is the point of launching a self-governing blockchain that can actually upgrade if you're not going to use this as a cheat? So I think being much earlier to market, because I think Tezos could have launched before Ethereum if it had launched in proof of work. I think that would have probably been even more impactful. Launch earlier probably would have been the right move by far.
Okay. Oh, one funny thing I noticed on your website today that you still refer to Ethereum as proof of work. So you might want to.
Oh, it's still on a website. Okay, the website needs to be updated. I think it's like the taint is forever. There you go.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's the origin story. Where do you see things heading now? It's been
Ethereum is proof of work, of course, and it's called Ethereum Classic. There's a fork of Ethereum which is proof of stake, which is.
That's a whole nother podcast. We could get into that.
I can have a lot of bad face argument for why this has not been modified on the website, but clearly it's just because there was a rotation of the teams that was updating the website.
It's okay.
We'll get on that.
Just thought it was funny. So where things in crypto are bleak, if talked to a lot of people, that's certainly the public attention, I think, is waning. How are you perceiving all of that? And what are you excited about, or where do you think things are headed in the broader space?
I think the things that make me bleak might be different from the things that make other people bleak here. Was there interest in crypto, or was it just a speculative fervor? And fundamentally, the biggest problem is that this technology has been there for over 13 years now, and the product market fits are still very slim, and they exist and they're beautiful. For example, I think we have a huge art community on Tezos, lots of great artists, and we're seeing mainstream pickup with museums displaying Tezos artists and launching initiatives. So that's beautiful. It's not a huge total addressable market if you just think of it from a business perspective, but it's beautiful that it's there, that it exists. And I'm like a huge fan of the art community on Tezos. So we've seen some of that, but definitely the whole global adoption and everything on blockchain hasn't panned out. But that's also never been me. In some sense, I got into Tezos because I love the fringe aspects of it. And to some extent, we have to maybe more temper people's expectation of what the technology can do, what it can provide. I think it's fantastic. I think there are non-fringe use cases, there are mainstream use cases. But the thing to be bleak about is like, why are there so little? Why is so much of it basically nonsense? Why is so much of it fraud? That's, I would say, is part of the problem.
Yeah, that's interesting because I noticed in doing research on you guys that you just partnered recently with the California DMV to put digital versions of car titles on your blockchain. So that seems, I'm sure if I walked into the DMV and did that, I probably wouldn't even know, right? The back end is the Tezos blockchain. Is that sort of the idea here? And it seems, is that counter to what you're saying where it's not really fringe, but there are use cases that large institutions are realizing could help them update how they do things?
Well, it's interesting because Tezos is really a generic technology. But I can't say that personally I understand in details like the way that the DMV operates, the way they do title. And so I think it's wonderful if people can make the technology work for them. And it seems to have been the case with the DMV. And this is ultimately what I'd like to do is build technology, not having necessarily to think about the ways that people are going to find it useful, but just put it out there, focus on things like throughput, latency, developer experience, ease of use, and then see creativity. I did not necessarily anticipate in 2014 that art would be so big on blockchains. I did think about book signing. I thought that ebook signing would be a thing on blockchain. So like NFTs for ebooks was one of my earliest ideas, but I didn't really necessarily see the scale of it. And that's the most beautiful thing is when you see like these use cases pop up that you would never think about because they're not necessarily in an industry that you know about or a use case that you're personally familiar with.
Yeah. Do you have much of a music community on Tezos?
Yes, there is. If you go to dns.xyz, for example, they focus on music NFTs, and there's a lot of artists, in particular hip-hop artists, who have been releasing music on Tezos. I'm super excited about music as a use case because music is a form of art that it's probably the most popular form of art. It's a form of art that is consumed by the most people in the world. People love collecting music, but with the move to streaming, a lot of the joy of collecting has gone away. And if NFTs or digital collectibles can bring back this joy of collecting to the music world, I think that it's one of the few things that are around there which generally have the potential to touch hundreds of millions of people. And there's not that many of those in the blockchain space.
Yeah, I agree. And and I've said it before on this podcast and other places, like the more you learn about the music industry and how it works and how it's just set up at every step of the way to screw artists out of money and control, you realize how ripe that whole industry is for getting more into a permissionless peer-to-peer system where musicians can interact directly with their fans. And certainly the streaming model that you mentioned is completely broken. I saw this tweet. It was, can't remember the artist, but you would know it if I said his name. But he said that he testified before Congress that one of his most popular songs streamed 55 million times. And from those 55 million streams, he made $1,700. So
yeah, bleak numbers. And I think it's the thing is, I think the fans, if they can support the artist directly, would be willing to support in much larger amounts.
Absolutely. And that's definitely not in the music company's interest to do that. So that's the big fight going on there. But I think it's a really interesting one to keep an eye on. Arthur, this has been fascinating. Thank you for being so forthcoming and just like sharing your story with me. Really appreciate it. Obviously, you're very well known out there, but if people want to learn more about Tezos or the foundation, where would you point them? And if they wanted to learn more about you, can you tell people how to get in touch?
So for Tezos, you can go to Tezos.com, which is a website that will tell you all about Tezos and apparently will give you slightly outdated information about Ethereum. For the Tezos Foundation, Tezos.foundation. So the Tezos Foundation is a nonprofit located in Switzerland with a mission to help foster the adoption of the Tezos protocol. And if you want to be in touch with me or learn about me, I'm active on Twitter under the handle @ArthurB.
Excellent. All right, Arthur, again, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. And we'll have to do this again soon to see and check in on where Tezos is headed.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.